Good morning to the crime community, the VC, vinyl community. Here with my favorite book. I'm going to read a couple chapters. First one's called Rashomon 69. The Cielo Waverly crimes rose to the surface from a deep sewer of bustling, interconnected criminality, so Labyrinth will never be able to trace all the tributaries. Seen properly, even what little we can trace of the hidden network reveals the demonized culprits of the several of the beautiful casualties as players in the same lethal chessboard. In the decade since the last edition of this book, hundreds of pieces of new information about the crimes came to my attention. When new data contradicted my earlier conclusions, I corrected and otherwise revised the text accordingly. Charlie's cautious but candid efforts in the last years of his life to add detail, insight, and precision to his chapter were enormously helpful. Acting on what he told me and further following up on the leads, I especially revised the section on the Waverly killings. Despite all that I learned about the LaBianca demise since 2011, let me state categorically that I still don't think anyone, with the possible exception of the three surviving killers themselves, know what exactly really happened. Even several of those responsible, especially Leslie Van Houten, didn't fully understand what in the world they were doing there. Witnesses silent for years who read my book or heard my interviews about it came forward to speak for the first time and final time, adding crucial definitions to the foggy picture. Many ask of their anonymity to be preserved out of enduring fears and traumas. Several graciously allowed their revelations to be attributed to them. Other aging criminals and forgotten show business survivors I tracked down spoke volumes with their hostile unwillingness to remember. Some readers may falsely assume that the untold secrets must be guarded by the remaining members of the Manson commune. Except for those directly involved in the murders themselves, I don't think this is true. Very few of those stone gullible and not particularly prospective youngsters were privy to what really drove the crimes their more brutal friends committed. On the contrary, it's the few honest souls among the friends and families of the victims and their associates who have been most helpful in declaring the real reasons their loved ones died. Some aspects of the enigma, once out of focus, are now clearer. Other than it seemed like certainties dissolved like a desert heat image in the light, more accurate, some shown on the shadows. The influx of the previously unknown particulars enriches our understanding in some areas, even as it reveals just how many more uncharted regions remain forever out of grasp. For every fragment of the hidden truth assembled here, I excluded scores of credible but unconfirmed rumors I could have mentioned. Many seemingly fantastic tales I've heard from those who were there when I first began looking into the abyss have turned out to be true. Just as many of the most commonly believed facts never happened at all. For instance, as long ago as 1980s, I heard whispers from Charlie and other several well-known personalities and mysterious others were at the Cielo Drive crime scene in the early hours between the murders and the arrival of the police. In recent years, substantiation for some of these claims emerged. Reading between the lines of the lies I've heard from both sides of the Rashomon wormhole, that's where the chapter title comes from, in the fabric of reality, I've developed intuitions of my own about what may still be concealed. Since they can't be proven, I have them mostly unsaid. Otherwise, deliberate omissions of this type may be made in the spirit of Joseph Conrad, who wrote, "These are things, moments that are not to be tossed to the public's incomprehension for journalists to gloat on." For Whom the Bell Tolls, the Beach Boys murders. Shortly after our December 2012 Coco Ron prison meeting, Charlie's illegal cell phone was confiscated. The prison staff's inconvenient interference in their most notorious resident operations forced him to revert to calling me on the monitored prison phone. It was back to those frustrating belief in abruptly terminated 15-minute calls. I picked up the ringing phone one early morning to the recorded message telling me that this was a call from a prisoner in a correctional facility. When Charlie was transferred through, he got right to it, knowing where this little time to spare. He said he'd been considering what I'd written about the Cielo Drive killings in my book. There was something he needed to tell me, he said. It would help me to understand how he experienced that turning point in his life, as opposed to how others assumed he perceived it. He asked me if I remembered that in our earliest communications, he warned me that if I wanted to release the album of his that SST Records canceled due to death threats, it would cause trouble because his music always caused trouble. I told him I did. If it wasn't his big song, Charlie said, it wouldn't be where he was. Then he related on an anecdote about a 68 meeting with Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys that he even pondered ever since August of 69. Stupid ass Vincent Bugliosi led you all down the primrose path with the Beatles shit, man, Charlie said. That was Pat's trip, meaning Patricia Krenwinkel, not mine. When we went down, it should all be called the Beach Boys murders. Speaking in the measured and reflective tone, Charlie recalled how Brian Wilson, as other witnesses have confirmed, made a supportive but futile attempt to groom his brother's Dennis's unruly diamond in the rough discovery, the Wizard, into a marketable pop star. Many contemplating the ex-con's seemingly unlikely collaboration with the Beach Boys don't understand that the band encountered was not the vital top 10 machine that the bands of Endless California Summer had been only a few seasons earlier. They were just coming off an ill-advised and financially disastrous empty auditorium tour that filled the lecture of their guru, the Maharishi Yoga, that absolutely nobody paid to see. Their business manager, Nick Grillo, warned the group that they were nearly bankrupt due to their profligate ways. The collapse of the ambitious and much-hyped Smile sessions 1 year earlier was the public and professional embarrassment this feeble and increasingly Brian free follow-ups did little to assuage. The hip counterculture critics of the time derisively dismissed the band's increasingly uninspired output of Stale and Square. Even their own long-term capital were preparing to cut their losses on the flailing and ailing fallen pop gods of yesteryear. In 68, the Beach Boys were badly in need of reinvention if they had any hope of keeping up with the times. Dennis Wilson's discovery that year of All the Way Alive Charlie, then billing himself as the only true original hippie, seemed to be one possible solution to the Beach Boys' waning cultural relevance and fading artistic verve. After Charlie's arrest and descent into unprecedented infamy a little over a year after he entered their circle, the band protected their brand by blaming their work with Manson solely on scapegoat Dennis. But Brian and Carl Wilson were at first just as enthusiastic about Manson's music as Dennis was. However, as Paul Watkins, the witness to the sonic striving, recalled in his quasi-useful memoir, Through Dennis and Greg, we lined up recording sessions at Brian Wilson's studio. None of them went well. Charlie liked to improvise even during these live recordings, and it didn't work. Invariably, our best sessions were outside the studio in a relaxed environment. Despite the difference in working methods, perfectionist Brian Wilson and Terry Melcher dedicated considerable resources into capturing the raw power of the Wizard songs in those elusive reel-to-reel tapes locked up since '69 in the Beach Boys archives like sonic skeletons in a closet. On this occasion, sometime in the summer of '68, most likely July, Brian invited Charlie to a one-on-one meeting at his 16-track home studio at Bellagio Road, where Steve's old buddy lives, but he's not going to talk about it. We already talked about the Sand House, but I think I deleted those tapes because somebody got unalived. The plan was to brainstorm on the potential Brothers records, that's the Beach Boys' label, recording artist career. They'd fallen into a heated argument at an earlier session with Carl and Dennis Wilson in attendance. Brian had urged Charlie to lay off his more persuasive style of guitar playing and adapt a smoother approach to a song that was recorded that has still, according to its composer, never been heard of anyone outside that close circle. His private rendezvous with Wilson's attempt to make peace with the temperamental but promising talent. When Dennis and the rest of the band sallied forth to earn some badly needed cash from live concerts, Brian stayed behind, sequestered in his Bellagio Road home. This left Brian to tend to the talented but temperamental singer-songwriter they hoped to record in their boutique Brothers record label. According to what Charlie told me, Brian offered him his musical advice, expressing his admiration for his singing, but suggesting changes to some of the vocal phasing in the tunes they recently been recording. He also counseled Charlie that he would wear more fashionable hip clothes from the Beverly Hills men's boutique called the Jaxx, Jaxx. This coming on from the increasingly mentally ill and slovenly Brian, whose sartorial statement at this time was shambling downstairs to the studio from his bedroom in his pajamas and bathrobe. Finally, Brian recommended that Charlie would look a little sharper if he acquiesced to get a hairstyle from a barber who tended to the Beach Boys' locks since 1964. Jay Sebring. Brian even volunteered to pay for the pricey clip. This, or so Charlie claimed, was the first time he heard of the man whose name would soon be forever enmeshed with his. And at that very moment, Wilson uttered Sebring's name. Charlie recalled they both heard a deep, resonant ringing of a bell. It's like me going to a Buddhist meeting, and I'm not going to talk about it because Gary Hemman was there. The very moment Wilson uttered Sebring's name, Charlie recalled they both heard a deep, resonant ringing of the bell. They could not identify the source of the sound. I wonder if that guy ever thinks about that, Charlie mused. Yeah, you should ask him. I reminded him that none of the Beach Boys or their entourage responded to my request for interviews over the years. He should have known that since he told me that he still sent letters to the Beach Boys' office that predictably went unanswered. Some of these epistles, he said, suggested some songs, just as he offered them, ceased to exist as a sonic remedy to their internal strife decades earlier. Naturally, the sworn nonconformist proudly said he didn't heed any of his well-intended advice from one of the era's most celebrated songwriters, though he still voiced his respect for Wilson's talent. Charlie praised the troubled musical genius who mentored him as a humble soul, nor one of the other fucking assholes who think their shit doesn't stink. Charlie did take up Brian's offer to be spruced up by Sebring. It seems unlikely to me, based on what I know of his Henri contrarian nature, but the possibility remains one of the many intriguing unknowns. Hearing of this episode, I couldn't help but reflect above Charlie's litany of complaints about the restrictions of the music business and the requirements of professional recordings. Studio recordings were just another prison. For decades, he had been forced to conform to the intrusive, arbitrary, and often humiliating rules and regulations he was obliged to obey in the correctional institutes he had been locked up since '69. In his heart of hearts, I wonder if he really never wished that he'd been a little more willing to compromise with the music industry's heavyweights who once championed his talents. Charlie largely accepted his fate with stoic fatalism. And yet I always felt that it was a tragedy that this talented and spiritually aware creative mind with everything going for him threw it all away by getting needlessly caught up in the chaotic drug-dealing misadventures of the younger companions, Beausoleil and Watson. Charlie said he didn't have cause to think of the puzzling Bell incident again until the uncannily silent pre-dawn hours of 9th of August, '69, when he entered the bloody living room at Cielo Drive not long after the Beach Boys' barber was killed during Watson's meth rampage. It interpreted his anomalous episode as further proof that the murders of the Polanski house was predestined. See, Charlie said, what I'm saying? Don't think I can answer all of the questions you got, man. I've been sitting here where you left me for years trying to understand how this fucking Manson thing happened to me. I still don't know every game they were playing. I'm their clown, man. See, it's a much bigger circus than I ever knew. In the confronting abundance of conflicting anecdotes, Charlie related to me about the crimes he was convicted to death for supposedly ordering. One constraint was his insistence that his association with the Beach Boys and their year-long effort to record his music was the skeleton key of it all. His reasons for this assertion were only vaguely outlined. I gathered Charlie based it on the fact that he hadn't run into Dennis Wilson at Gary Hinman's Topanga crash pad around April 668. He would have never gone on to meet his central players in the drama of Tex Watson, Sharon Tate, Terry Melcher, John Phillips, Mama Cass, Rudy Antebelli, Charlene Caffritz, and the others introduced to him by Watson. Furthermore, it was the Beach Boys associate Byron Lukowski, Lukaschevsy, who Charlie previously met at Dennis Wilson's Malibu mansion in '68, who was responsible for snitching out to Wilson, Melcher, and Jacobson about the shooting of Bernard Crowe, a syndicate drug dealer known to them all. See, that's the problem I have right here. This thing with Bernard Crowe being a syndicate drug dealer. Did anybody ever bring that up? Makes me sick, man. Luchevsky's indiscretion effectively ended my chance for Charlie's musical career. Then, as you will read in the latter section of this chapter, Charlie maintained that there was a different link between his latter confrontation with Beach Boys business manager Nick Grillo and the slaying of Lino LaBianca. The Beach Boys, Carl Wilson, and the other musicians in the Wilson camp seemed to be aware that some of the violence was pending even before the Cielo slaughter, adds further confirmation of the suspicion that the archetypal feel-good California pop group knew more than they ever dared to say about the archetypal Carlsbad California crime spree. This factious and feuding band's ongoing efforts 5 decades after the founding to present the public with an ever-changing revisionist narrative of even the least controversial aspects of their history might, if highly doubtful, they will remain ever come clean on the true nature of their relation with Manson. Now was Charlie alone in his understanding that his involvement with the Beach Boys played a vital role in the killings. For the brief, unhappy time allotted to Dennis Wilson after the crimes, the drug-addicted drummer was also clearly burdened by his guilt in bringing together the accused cast of killers and victims. I suspect that Wilson fully realized what his friends and lovers attached to the Manson commune were capable of when he learned of his recent roommate, Bobby Beausoleil, killed their mutual friend Gary Hinman at the very Topanga Canyon house where Wilson first met Charlie a little over 1 year earlier. Now Charlie had added J.C. Bring to the list of Beach Boy links he'd already enumerated, although he was always conspicuously angry about confirming or denying whether he ever met the hairstylist. For the record, I consider it nearly impossible that Sebring and Charlie didn't meet. The two diminutive bisexual ladies men had far too many mutual lovers, clients, and associates in common for their paths not to be crossed. Professional Beach Boy whitewashers continually live in denial of the facts Charlie attested to, but Dennis Wilson's first wife, Carol Friedman, confirmed Charlie's claim that he was much closer to her ex-husband and his colleagues than the band's public relations department would like you to know, telling Tom O'Neill that the association between Wilson and Manson was, as Charlie told me from the beginning of our association, far deeper than publicly revealed. It's a scary thing, she said, that anyone who knows anything will never talk. I can only amend Friedman's statement to say that someone who knew about the scary things have indeed talked, and almost never on the record. When discussing the LaBianca murders during the research of this 2011 edition of this tome, Charlie always carried a direct connection between the LaBianca's demise and Dennis Wilson's refusal to pay him the promised $5,000 owed for Charlie's contributions to the Beach Boys' 2020 album. As if Charlie asserted with uncharacteristic directness, the Waverly robbery was at least partially motivated by a favor owed to his mobster King Big mentor, Frankie Carbo. The favor in question also involved his music. Charlie owed one to the Carbo due to his influential gangster efforts to serve as character reference when Charlie sought employment as a musician at mob-owned nightclubs upon his 1967 parole from Terminal Island. That, however, was a strictly practical underworld matter of debts owed. The significant Charlie placed on the Sebring bell ringing episode pointed to his belief that regardless of Tex and Linda's practical motive for their crimes, far less worldly currents played their part in the crime as well. This echoed his mystical notion discussed in this book's introduction, posting that some malevolent transhuman force had been watching him and setting him up since his childhood to get entangled in the slaughter he always be associated with. I don't know what strict rationalist will dismiss the Mansonian interpretation of the most infamous of the crimes he was charged with as yet another deranged mumbo jumbo. But as Charlie often observed, there was always a spiritual dimension to every world event. What do I have to say about the bell ringing event? Why are there so many drones flying around the world? Is this off world or on world? Yeah. Thanks to all the people for tuning in and checking out. We paid for peace with all the family, and have a very nice day.